welcome to Brain X here at Ramada Kelowna. Coming up, we're going to hear from some of the most inspired thinkers in the field as they share some powerful insights into brain injury.
So I am going to talk about caregiver fatigue, and I will tell you that when I received the email from Magda asking me to speak, and I saw the topic that she wanted, with all due respect, Magda, I literally groaned out loud. I'm like, really, Magda, again? And I have spoke about this several times. I've written articles about it, and the reason why I groaned was because I've always felt that I wasn't authentic in giving the presentation. And I say that because everybody wants me to tell the caregiver what to do, how they should fix their life to get back to where it was. And what's not authentic about that is there's a big, ugly reason and many truths behind this why they get caregiver fatigue in the first place. So today, I'm going to turn it on its head a little bit and try and be that authentic voice for the caregiver, for the families, and for our survivors to show what is really happening and how we collectively have to change this to make it better for them. So first of all, not going to work again. There we go. Just a little bit about me. I haven't been in brain injury a short period of time. It's been more than half of my life has been involved in brain injury. I'm 62 years old. I've been supporting my first husband's brother since I was 17 years old. He was born, had 3 cerebral hemorrhages within 24 hours of birth. We've been through a roller coaster of mental health and addiction issues with him, and sometimes he's speaking to us and sometimes he's not. And right now we're in the cycle of we're not speaking to you, so we're okay with that. My husband was a police officer in Penticton and was hit by a car in 1990 and suffered a brain injury and lived for 5.5 months before he passed away. My brother died the year before my husband of a brain injury. He suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a result of prescription drugs that interacted, and he was in a coma for 2 weeks before he died. My good friend Ruth died 2 weeks before my husband, and she had lived with a brain injury for 3 years before she developed an inoperable brain tumor where she had been hit, or her head had been hit on the curb. So I tell people, in all honesty, what I've learned the most about brain injury was from Ruth, because I had 3 years with her as a really good friend, and my brother-in-law, who struggles with all of the things that we've talked about today. He hasn't been homeless, he's nearly been homeless, but he's taught us the most about how it impacted him and how it impacts our family. I'm also a registered professional counselor. I did that 8 years ago and offer counseling in a private practice, but I also am with the Caregivers Center for the Family, which gives me lots of opportunity to work with families and individuals. And I really feel like in the 28 years since my husband has passed, that I've worked my best to educate people on the grief journey that families and survivors go through. And it was never even talked about when it happened to us and when we were living in it. So that's a big passion for me, and a big interest is to see this move forward and for all of us to help people explore that grief and to heal from it so that they can redesign and rebuild their life and become whole again, happy and healthy-minded, spiritually and physically too. I also work for the Caregivers Center for the Family in community programming and employment, as well as doing counseling. And recently, my family and I have started the Constable Gerald Breese Center for Traumatic Life Losses, where we are supporting families of military, police, and first responders, as well as families of brain injury, and anybody who's had trauma in their life, including mental health and addictions, and looking for a way to fill the gaps in services as they are. So these numbers here, this is what the stats that we're using for everything. And I'm only putting this up there because the reality is that we have 1.5 million Canadians living with a brain injury, that you have to look at who's attached to those people. And on a conservative side, And I know this from working with families, that easily you can say two people, at least two people, are supporting their loved one. And if you take that two people or three people that are supporting the survivor with a brain injury, that number really, 1.5 million, is actually 3 or 6 million people who are living with a brain injury. Because never, ever is it only the survivor that's living with the brain injury. It is the entire family going through this. So the responsibility of care, and this was my very first presentation I ever did. I don't know if Doug Rankmore is still here, but Doug allowed me to speak in Naramata, and I did a presentation called Hope Begins with a Heartbeat. And what I really wanted to demonstrate then is what I'm saying here, is that never ever, in my personal experience or with families, has anybody ever shied away from the responsibility of care. The moment they hear their loved one is alive, they feel hope. The moment they hear their loved one survived, they are committed to do whatever they can do to get their family member through this. They are committed to that. Nobody shies away from the responsibility of care. What will happen, though, is that if you look at these numbers for caregivers in Canada, and these are stats talking in general, being a caregiver, which really is about So a caregiver is defined as a person who is supporting someone for 2 hours a week, right? That's generally the term how it's defined. But as we know with families and survivors of brain injury and collectively, this is a 24/7 job, 365 days a year. They don't work 9 to 5 and they don't get a break. So these numbers are really important for us to look at, because if you look at what's happening with our seniors, those numbers are expected to grow, so the caregiver numbers are expected to grow, and we have caregivers with families with brain injury, those are growing too. And that is the reality of the work that we're in. We want to say we're working our way out of a job. The tragedy is we haven't stopped brain injury from happening, and therefore we haven't stopped the caregiver role from happening either. And now we are having the experience of an aging population of people with brain injury, and those will bring some unique health challenges, not only for them, but for the family. And so we need to get our act together to say, how are we going to support this entire family to face these challenges as that person is aging, and then take care of them as well. The reality, too, is that a caregiver, if you are supporting a family member, a spouse, or a child, you are more likely to be reporting an injury, to seeking medical help for yourself, and they're more likely to be prescribed drugs to cope. And I don't know that that's a winning recipe for anyone. So while that spends the amount of money that the caregivers save our government and taxpayers is in the billions of dollars, it does not come without personal expense to the caregiver in all areas of their life. And when I say this, it's just really to inform people that this is the walk that they're on in that journey. It's not anything about their loved one and their behaviors and all of that. It's about the role that they're playing, and in many ways that they're forced to play. That they have to do this. They're the point of care. They're the responsibility of care. They're the one that's trying to pull the family together. So they need our help too. But individually, we have to look at the truth that psychologically, spiritually, physically, financially, and socially, our caregivers are impacted. And so not only the mental health and addictions that we can see for our survivors being a challenge, you need to know that that's a reality for caregivers too. Mental health, anxiety, depression, sadness, hopelessness, no end in the tunnel, no light at the end of the tunnel for them. They're frustrated, they're tired, they're exhausted, they don't have a social life, financially they're hit hard, they're fighting for everything they've got, and we're going to tell them how they should take care of themselves. Doesn't make sense. So whether you call that caregiver grief, caregiver burnout, or caregiver fatigue, I don't care. I just call it that this system isn't working in what we ask them to do. Because if you honestly think that any woman or man has forgotten how to have a nice glass of wine or a beer with a girlfriend and a buddy and sit on the sun deck and tell some good stories, they haven't forgotten how to do that. That is a lost luxury. That is a lost luxury, because sometimes they're working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, and they're doing the caregiving. So we need to look at all that. Doesn't matter what you want to call it. We need to get in there with the family and help them explore it and see what we can do differently to make this better for them collectively. So the responsibility of care shifts to become the burden of care. And that isn't about the survivor's behavior or the things that they're not able to do anymore. And that's not about the caregiver not being able to cope. It's about our system and what we put on our families to deal with. Now, I know in Victoria, we face a big challenge in terms of where our funding sits in the Health Authority. We're under home care and community support. That's very different than being under mental health and addictions. And my daughter and I work for the CRIDG. We've had a huge case that we've been working on. Very, very challenging to get the doors opened for other services, because it's brain injury, go over there. Because it's mental health, go there. Because it's addiction, go there. We're not working together. And who is suffering for this? It's the caregivers, the families, and the survivors. So the shadows of brain injury, all of these things are what the unintended consequences of a brain injury are. And it doesn't just impact the survivor, as I said, it's the entire family. The first thing I was told in the hospital before my husband even was discharged was that 85% of marriages would end in divorce. And I remember saying to them, why are you telling me this now? Like, well, they wanted me to have him put into an institution, is what they said. And I didn't, and he didn't need to be, and we had 5.5 more months with him. But I'm on a mission to say that, you know what? We can save 90% of these marriages by putting services and supports in place for however long that family needs it. We don't have to give people information like this. It doesn't have to be this way. And it doesn't have to be this way just because that's the way it's always been. Because if we do things the way it's always been, you wouldn't be sitting under a chandelier. You'd have a lamp or a candle beside you right now. We need to change it up. So the reality of the services, that there's a lot of shadows because there's a lot of gaps. And I say this with respect to all of our service providers because I'm in that role too, and I know our hands are tied. I know that there's limited funding, but we have to change that. We have to be included in mental health and addictions. We have to be, those doors have to be open. We have to sit at the table together and figure out how we're going to help this entire family to get through this for however long they need it, not for however long we tell them they need it. In Victoria, you are lucky to get 6 months of transitional support. 6 months. And I can tell you as a service provider, our workers barely know that client in 3 months. And at 6 months, we're ending service. It's not going to work. So what's needed? Yes, there's the awareness for the caregiver. What do they need to do to take care of themselves? How are you going to go the distance? How are you going to have a life beyond this? How are you going to feel a sense of joy? How are you going to connect to your heart again? How are you as a family going to make those heart-to-heart connections? There's all of that. We need to go beyond and look at early interventions and keep those interventions for however long, and that's just a mantra that I have, for however long the person and the family need it, not for however long we tell them that the dollars are there. Counseling for the survivor and the family. I am really blessed that with the CRIDG, that they allow me to provide that counseling to the family. When I get funded to counsel a survivor through our health authority, it's the survivor only. And that doesn't work either, because your family, your caregiver, never gets a platform to explore their grief or share their pain. And if you don't get to do that, you don't get to heal. And if you don't get to heal, you don't get to have a life. This graphic here, and I encourage you to go to the CRIDG's website. Our family charity and the CRIDG partnered to do a 10-minute video called Surviving the Perfect Storm, Mental Health, Addiction, and Brain Injury, or Brain Injury, Mental Health, and Addiction. And this was a graphic that we had put in there. You can download this. And the reason I included in here with caregivers is because on that green side where we show the difference that we can make for a survivor if we have early interventions and support them through their journey, journey, it is also reflective of how that would support the caregiver and the family, that we need to help them get their life back. And they need this as much as the survivor does so that they can be a family. So when they're redesigning their life, what do you do to help them? First of all, recognize that your families are often at ground zero. They are exhausted from fighting with WCB, ICBC, PWD. Have you ever made a phone call to PWD on behalf of a survivor? Right? You're in the loop for 45 minutes to an hour. We've even had our own contractors that they've hung up on them before they even got the information. Like, it's frustration upon frustration. And again, they're not doing this from 9 to 5. This is a 24/7. And then they also maybe have children that they're looking after. They may have a job that they have to go to. They may have limited income because if it's a spouse and they're not able to go back to work, it impacts the lifestyle. And they're just so frantic with how they're going to pay the bills. They don't have time to think about an exercise program. They don't have time to think about going to a support group. And I am for support groups. I run them. But I also understand the resistance. Because when this happened in our family, in one split second, our front door opened and everything we knew in our marriage for 14 years was gone. Everything. Our social commitments, our community involvement, our parenting styles with our children, our equal partnership in a marriage was gone. And in the back door came everybody. Psychologists, PTs, OTs, you name it, and they all told us how we were going to live our life and do it as of today, because this is your job now. So there is a resistance from our families, and I get that. I understand that because they haven't been able to grieve the losses. And so nobody is going to be satisfied with giving up their social commitments to take on a support group. They will go there as part of their healing when they're guided, supported, and offered ways to find solutions that are meaningful for themselves, and then it will work. And if we do all of that, I guarantee that your caregivers are going to get a life. They will get a life. They'll take that bath. They'll enjoy a good meal. All of those things will happen. But right now, and for most of you, and there are caregivers here and there are survivors here, and if you think that I'm not speaking the truth, just ask them what they're walking through. So we can change this, but it's going to take us collectively, and it doesn't matter. I don't care who our politicians are or our religious leaders in the world are. This is not a liberal problem. It's not an NDP problem. It's not a conservative problem. It's all of our problems, because brain injury comes from every walk of life and touches everyone. So this is where you can find me. I will be here all day. I'm happy to talk to people, and I hope that this represented what families are actually going through. And I do this with respect to our service providers. I know your hands are tied, but we need to do things differently, and we need to be brave and stand up together and say, this is not working, and it's time for change. Thank you.
That's all from us here at the Brain X Symposium. If you'd like more information on any of today's topics, you can head over to Brain Trust Canada's website. I'm your host, Lucy Hazelwood. Until next time, this is Shore TV.